All right, Untapped GG now has a setting for Conquest mode. And so we're going to go over the top 5 decks in the Conquest mode. Specifically, we're going to be looking at Pool 3 Collection Complete players over Collection Powers 3000. And we're going to be talking about the Infinity tier. This is mostly going to be based off of my experience. I was able to get 2 borders, probably could have had 3 or more if I would have played a little bit more. But it's going to be about my experience with the meta, and we're going to go over 3 different categories of decks, the best decks in the Conquest mode right now, some decks that I'm really interested in trying out that actually I was kind of surprised with, and then we're also going to talk about some decks that I would avoid. Now, the best decks in the meta right now, without a doubt, are going to be the bounce decks, and there's a couple versions of the bounce decks, and Spider-Ham made the bounce meta just a lot better. And I have played this one right here quite a bit. Runs Shang-Chi and Iron Man, so it has the ability to get very large very quickly. This deck does require some playing to get used to. There's some negative synergy there with Kitty Pryde and America Chavez, and so pretty much you have to beast your Kitty Pryde if you want to play Kitty Pryde and America Chavez on the last turn. But typically, Chavez is just there to thin out the deck, and that works great. Amazing synergy with Bast in pretty much every card here on this build, with the exception of Beast. That's fine. Beast did have a change. You know, the stats went up. And I believe a lot of people have access to most of these cards, with the exception of Jeff. You absolutely can substitute out Jeff and still get very good results. This deck list right here pretty much has nearly identical results in Conquest, and runs Iceman. And Jeff is just one of those cards. You need Jeff. Jeff is one of the best cards in the game, one of the best 2-drops in the game. He has won me so many games. I am a huge fan of Jeff. If you have a way of picking up Jeff, I would highly recommend it. Now, this is the Iron Man Shang-Chi version. You can replace Shang-Chi with Jeff if you want to, but basically Iceman, Shang-Chi, and Jeff are kind of like the flex slot on this deck, but the rest of the cards are pretty much static. Now, there is a traditional bounce build as well. I do find this build a little trickier to play with Falcon and Collector, but it does a lot of the same things. This one also runs Hood and Bast. This deck just requires thinking. Now, there's a couple cards that kind of ruin this deck, and that would be Wave and Killmonger. Now, the cool thing about Conquest is that you can absolutely track what your opponent is playing and figure out what to do. And I am sponsored by Untapped.gg, where largely I got a lot of this data from. Link is in the description, but that is the app that shows above my head when I stream and shows what cards I have left in my deck. And it also will show what cards your opponents have played, so you can keep track of what you are actually playing inside of Conquest. I love the Conquest mode. So for me, the best deck in the game right now are going to be the bounce decks. Now we're going to talk about the Evo decks, and there's 3 different archetypes of Evo that have been good since the start, and they continue to be very good inside of the Conquest mode. I do think that there's going to be some sort of modification to the Evo builds, whether that is to Hulk or to Wasp remains to be seen, but these are dominant decks right now. And there's 3 different variations that are common right now. The most popular and the most successful one is going to be the Lockjaw versions. I like this one the best because it runs Wave. Wave is very effective against decks that like to play a lot of cards on turn 6. The bounce decks, the Sarah control decks is very effective. It also allows to bring out a large card early on turns 4 or 5. So there's a lot of synergy there with Wave. I mean, you could just throw Wave into Lockjaw and pull out a bigger card. That also is a thing. There's some versions of this deck that instead of running Wave, they run Spider-Ham. There's another version that runs Killmonger instead of Wave. And then there's other versions of this deck that run Dracula, the more RNG favored ones. And the ones that run Dracula typically run Infinite as well. Then there is like the traditional high evolutionary build. This one runs Luke Cage, Rogue, and Hazmat. I am a huge fan of Rogue, and we're going to talk about the decks that I use to get my 2 infinite borders, which is going to be a variation of the Lockdown build, which I'm going to show next. But this deck right here runs Hazmat, which effectively allows to play oftentimes Abomination for free, because the cost of Abomination will go down based on the number of opponent cards that have been affected with the negative effect. So quite often you can be playing very inexpensive Abomination. This also runs the She-Hulk Sunspot combo, where typically you can skip turn 5 and then you can play She-Hulk for 1 and effectively play Abomination and or Thing on turn 6. I'm a big fan of Rogue. And I can't tell you the number of times that Rogue absolutely won the entire match for me. Rogue works particularly well against your opponent's Luke Cage and or your opponent's Hulk. Evo Control, and I ran a variation of this deck. When Conquest first came out, this was the deck build that I was primarily taken with, and I played this a bunch. Now, I removed Daredevil and Professor X, and I ran Rogue and Jeff. And I know a lot of people don't have Jeff, and a lot of people have asked me in my videos, hey, that's great that you got an infinite border. I don't have Jeff. Well, if you don't have Jeff, I would suggest running Daredevil and Professor X. Now, Rogue is just absolutely amazing. I can't tell you the number of matches that I absolutely just stripped massive cubes, or whatever they're called here, health, inside of Conquest with Rogue. And so I do recommend the version of the deck that I played, just because it ran Rogue, specifically targeting Hulks or Luke Cages, but I also used it against Blue Marvel. Oh my God, Cerebros. I mean, it just absolutely on turn 6 changed the entire outcome of the deck. Devil Dinos, Darkhawks, Nulls. Rogue catches your opponents by surprise. So, but the idea of this deck is locking down lanes can create a lot of problems for the bounce decks as well, because then they just run out of space. Now, we're going to talk about 3 decks that I want to play that are up and comers. Feel like these decks have a lot of positive traction. 2 of them are oldies but goodies, and one of them takes advantage of the Nick Fury rework, which basically makes Nick Fury a brand new card, plays entirely differently. Oldie but goodie, Shuri is back. So Red Skull went back to being a 5/14. This is a well-known archetype. Shuri was drastically changed, so you can't hide Shuri behind Cosmo anymore, or the target to Shuri. You know, you basically put Shuri in one lane and Cosmo in a different lane, but then you drop the big card into the Cosmo lane and then it's safe from Shang-Chi. Well, now Shuri doesn't have that advantage, but there's still armor. This is a well-known deck. This really blew my mind how well this deck is running now that they've reverted the changes back to Red Skull. So I have not played this in the current meta. So again, this is a deck that I want to play. Another deck that received numerous nerfs. Rockslide got nerfed, Stature got nerfed, Black Bolt got nerfed. Yet this is still effective. Enchantress got nerfed. Zabu got nerfed. So many of these cards here have been. Darkhawk got nerfed. They've really tried to tame this deck back, and it is still good. So I do recommend taking for this a spin. If you're familiar with this deck and you have all the cards ready to go and you liked playing in the past, I would suggest trying it again because it still works. And then this is a brand new archetype, probably out of all the decks that we've been talking about here, the one that I'm the most interested to try out. There's so many cool things with this deck with Nick Fury, and I just want to try it out. But logically in my brain, I can see how good this could potentially be with Nick Fury and Quinjet. You know, Nick Fury drawing 2 6-drops, and then you can play 1 on 5, and you can play 1 on 6 because of Quinjet. I actually lost to this deck where they pulled a random Heimdall. And how was I supposed to know that they had Heimdall? And they got Heimdall from Nick Fury. And I think that is one of the advantages that this deck is trying to use in Conquest mode, because in Conquest mode, you typically, after a couple rounds of playing against your opponent, you know what they're playing. But not on this deck, whether it's Agent 13 or Coulson or Nick Fury, creates a lot of surprise where you just won't know what your opponent's playing. So this is on the top of my list to try out. There's 4 decks that I largely am going to be avoiding for one reason or another. And I just want to say the way that I came across these 4 decks, I was looking for decks that were seeing a lot of play, but were getting much worse results than other decks that were seeing similar play. What I'm trying to say is, like, if a deck is being played 2,000 times, why do the other decks that are getting played 2,000 times have 60% win rate, yet this one has a negative win rate or 50-something% win rate? So largely these 4 decks, I feel like they're overplayed and they're underperforming. And these are going to be the 4 decks and the 4 archetypes that I'm going to be personally avoiding. If you love them and you play them better than I do, then go for it. I'm going to be avoiding playing destroy decks. I played against this a bunch and I had absolutely no problems running circles around it. Darkhawk, Devil Dino decks, feel bad right now. I know that I played against a bunch of these and it felt like my Spider Ham was absolutely destroying their Devil Dino consistently. Didn't seem to do very well. And then another versions of a Thanos destroy decks. This deck seems to be playing a lot. From the stats that I see on this deck, there are much better decks out there to play that perform very well. And then this deck right here is being played a lot and it has a negative win rate. And yet people still continue to play it a lot. I would avoid this deck unless there's another card that added makes better. There's one other deck that I did not talk about that I just wanted to have an honorable mention that still seems to be performing very well. But I was reluctant to put on the list. I haven't played against it recently, and I haven't played this deck recently. I've heard from other people that Sarah is getting destroyed, not only by Wave, but also by Spider Ham. But yet, when I looked at the stats, this deck is still doing very well. Historically, this has been one of my favorite decks. So, decks that I'm hyped about right now, without a doubt, are going to be bounce decks, high evolutionary decks, decks that I really want to try out and I think that are pretty good, but I haven't played a lot of them, would be this deck right here, the Shuri decks, the Stature Black Bolt decks, and then the newer Nick Fury decks. Decks that I'm going to avoid are going to be the Destroy archetype, the Dark Hawk, Devil Dino, the Thanos Destroy decks, and the Toxic Junk decks would be the decks that I'm personally going to be avoiding at this time. What is working for you? Just want to say, being comfortable with your deck and knowing when to snap and take advantage of favorable situations may be more important to have that information than what deck you actually play. Let me know what you think in the comment section. And as always, thanks for watching. Keep on gaming. Bye for now.